6, 7.
It's important to know the different sorts of pencils you might use. Like this first one, for example, is an HB, and that stands for hard black. This basically means it's halfway between the harder, lighter pencils and the softer, darker pencils. Here we have a 4B. Now B stands for black, and the higher the number, the darker it is. So there we have a 4B, it's pretty dark. Now using the 6B, you can see we go even darker. Now if you only ever use an HB to do your drawings, you might get some nice fine light tones, but you're really going to struggle to get those darker tones, and that's where the 4B and a 6B would come in handy to really get the contrast that's required to have really striking drawings. H stands for hard, and you get numbered H pencils going up. For example, 2H, 3H, 4H, and so on. And the higher the number, the harder the graphite and the lighter the outcome. If you go the other way, with the B values, the higher the number, the softer the graphite and the darker the outcome. Now all of these pencils are great to use depending on what sort of outcomes you're after. But if I just had one pencil to do a whole drawing with, I'd probably go with a 4B. This is because you can get lighter tones from it and darker tones from it. It would help obviously to have lighter pencils and darker pencils, and especially to get those really nice strong dark tones, I would recommend having at least a 6B. Now how you hold your pencil makes a huge impact on your outcomes. At primary school we're taught to hold the pencil like this at the end, nice and tight, which is great for handwriting, but when you're drawing, not only do you often get a big old smudge on your hand like this, but the actual effectiveness of your shading can be really hindered. What I suggest is like this, holding your pencil a lot further to the other end. In fact, about 2/3 down, and you can see here, it gives me much more movement through the hand, starting with the fingertips, through to the wrist. And you need to think when you're shading of using not only your fingers, your wrists, but down to your elbow, and often your shoulder too. This gives you much more control, but also brings much more fluidity and a confidence to your drawing. Another really effective way of holding the pencil is like this. Between your thumb and your finger, you can hold the pencil quite a long way down again, like before. And you rest your other fingers up against the pencil just to steady it. Turn your hand over, and again, this gives you a nice flexibility to use your fingers, your wrist, but it's a great way of working through to your shoulder. Now this is the sort of technique that I'll use when working on a much larger scale, and if the work's vertical against the wall or on an easel. Keeping your pencil nicely sharpened throughout a drawing really does help. First of all, you can use the tip for finer marks, but then you can also use it on its side to get much wider marks. Now here are some of the main shading techniques, starting with this, which is straightforward hatching. Alternatively, you can do your hatching and then turn it into cross hatching by shading the other way. This is the sort of thing that you can keep building up in different directions, layering up darker tones. There are other sorts of ways of applying shading as well, like contour shading. This is where you follow the shape of the object which you're actually drawing, and this really accentuates the three-dimensional form of the object. Another technique is stippling. This is where you put lots of dots or short dashes together to create a tone. The closer together the dashes and dots are, the darker the tone you'll achieve. Scumbling, more specifically circularism in this case, is where you can build up your layer of tone by using a quick circular motion with your pencil, as you can see here. Another form of scumbling, or scribble, is not so much a messy, random scribble, but can actually be much more considered than that. And whilst it might look erratic at first, if you can build up your tone through using a rhythmic motion, it can be really effective. All of these techniques can be used to create a range of tones depending on how you use your mark making. The closer together the marks are, the darker the tone would be, and the further apart the marks are, the lighter the tone would be. I mentioned earlier how different pencils can achieve different tones too, but probably the most important thing for effective shading is how much pressure you put down with the pencil. Using the same pencil, you can achieve a whole range of tones. Here, for example, just shading in little blocks, starting with a really dark tone, I can gradually build up, getting lighter and lighter as we go. And this is a great exercise to do to practice your skills in this area. Now, practice is what it's all about if you want to become really good at something. Here's an activity that will really help you. What you do is you start shading really dark with your pencil, and then you just gradually put less pressure on and get lighter. Now, using cross-hatching, you do the same again. Press hard and then gradually press lighter again. Now, if you repeated this over and over again, you'd definitely become great at shading, and that's all to do with muscle memory. The more you do something, the more natural it becomes, until in the end you don't even have to think about it, it just happens naturally. Now, here's an exercise for you to do, which is a more interesting, creative way to practice your skills. First of all, you draw out a whole series of straight lines to create geometric shapes. You could use a ruler if you like, but if you're not using a ruler, keep your fingers and wrists still and make your movements from your shoulder. Now you've created a series of abstract shapes, and like before, start shading in each shape really dark at first and then gradually press less hard to create lighter tones. Here I'm using hatching and then cross-hatching, but you can use any of the techniques which we looked at earlier to try this out. Take pride in the edges and really work to get them as precise and crisp as possible. This will really help hone your technique further. Keep working back into your shading until you get the perfect gradient from dark to light. Now, once you've finished the first shape, you can move on to the next. And what you do in this instance is where there's a really light edge, next to it you start off really dark and then blend out to light again, as before. What this will start doing is build up different shapes which stand out really well from each other. Where there's a light edge, it will come forward, and where there's a dark edge, it will give the illusion of the space going back. Knowing this means as you develop your drawing further, you can really choose which bits to go lighter and darker to get the best creative effects of your own. The sorts of shapes you work into is up to you too. You could do something like this, and then move on to doing, let's say, curvy or rounded shapes, and see how it is to shade them in. The point is, whatever you do, you've got to enjoy it, hone those shading skills, and create something that you're really proud of by the end. The great thing about shading these abstract shapes at this stage is that you don't have the pressures of having to make something look like something in the real world. Having said that, when you do come to actually draw objects from the real world, your techniques will be that much better, and you'll be far more intuitive to create the most effective drawings possible. Afterwards, you could try the activity with other media. Biro here, for example, using it in a similar way to build up tone. You could stick with pencils but move on to colour. After shading one colour, you could add another colour. You could try out different combinations, discover which colours work best together to give you the most vibrant, striking outcomes. It's a great way to explore all sorts of media. You could try pastels, paints, anything. Now, what you're creating here is actually an abstract piece of artwork, and the visual quality really does relate strongly to cubism and futurism. So if you like this activity, I really recommend you look these styles up and see what you think of them. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and it's helped you learn more about shading and how to become good at it. Now it's over to you. Have a go at this activity. Try tone at first, and once you've done that, you can explore all sorts of media to see which sort you think are more effective. Remember to look at the tips and techniques from earlier in the video, and you'll be well on your way to becoming great at shading. Enjoy your art, and I'll see you next time.